So now let's take a look at the application that we're building. So this is the contact list application that we're building. In this particular application, one can search for the applicants that are registered in here as well as create them. So for example, if I'd like to create one entry with the name maybe David, so and the phone number, that's going to be equal to 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 and 10, and add this entry. So here is the name David as well as this particular entry. Now if I like to search for this, for example, if I like to search for David, then I can search for it. As well, I can remove this. Now this is the entire application. In this particular application, you'll be learning about how to use different sorts of hooks inside of a React application, as well as how to use state management so that you can store this particular kind of data. So this is the entire application that we're building in this particular project.
So now we'll be creating a React application, and believe me when I say this, there are quite many ways to create a React application, but the CRA utility already saves us a lot of work, and it does saves us a lot of time. So we'll be using the CRA utility to create a React app. And to create your first React application, there are just these three commands that you need to run. That's npx create React app followed by the name of your app. Then you have to move into your project directory and then npm start. And if you just scroll down, you might see a video of what all will happen when you will run this command. That is npx create React app followed by the name of your app. After the success message, you can move into your app directory and launch your npm server or your React server from there. So now before we start creating a React application, there are certain prerequisites that need to be followed, which are mainly that you need to have Node.js installed on your system, which I'm going to presume that you already have. But if you don't, download it from the official website. At the time of recording, it's on version 16.1.14.0. You can download it from the official website. It's really simple to do so. You do not need any sorts of technical knowledge to install Node.js if you haven't used it. Alright, now apart from Node.js, you also need to have a Visual Studio Code or a code editor. I'm using Visual Studio Code Editor. You can download it from there for your Windows or Linux or Mac. They have it available for all three of the systems. Now, if you have certain other preference, for example, if you like Atom or maybe Sublime, feel free to use that. But Visual Studio Code does come with a lot of features that might come in handy when working with your not only React app but any sorts of application. So now we'll be creating a React application, and for that purpose, I need you to fire up your terminal or command prompt. Alright, so now let's check our node version for now. So to check the node version, just run node -v, and it should give you your node version and I am on version 16.13.1. Alright, so now we'll be creating a React application, and to do that, the first command that should be followed is npx create React app followed by the name of the app. So in this case, the name of application is React contact app. So that's what we're going to do. So npx create, and after this, we have to place the name of our application. Now there's one particular naming restriction, that is you just cannot have an uppercase letter inside the application's name. For example, I just cannot have contact with the uppercase C. It needs to be CONT, a lowercase c. Alright, so let's name our application. Contact React app. Alright, now after this, hit enter, and it is going to take some amount of time to create a React application. And once it's done, we'll be moving back and changing directories. Alright, so now we see our application has successfully been installed. Now we just need to change directories into our React application and start a server from there. Alright, so let's change our directories, that is to our contact React app. Alright, now to launch a Visual Studio Code instance of this application, I just have to run code with a period, and it's going to create up or launch my VS Code instance of my application. So now let's discuss the folder structure of application. As you might see that there are certain folders with the name node modules, and then public, and then this source directory, and getignore, and package-log.json, and package.json, and readme file. Now what does these node modules contain? These node modules actually take care of all your webpacks and Babel as a transpiler and ESLint configurations and setups and all. So we do not need to actually peek into this because this is not the area of our concern. It is quite a lot to handle if you just try to take a look into every file that's in here. As you might see that it is already having this .env and other files that is required inside of our application. All right. Okay, so after this, node modules, if you install certain packages as your third-party packages, for example, if you add packages like React Router DOM that you will, for routing purposes, the entire configuration is going to be saved inside this node modules. Now after this, we are having this public folder. This contains favicon.ico. So this is that little small icon that shows up on the browser screen on the title bar. Apart from this, we are having this index.html and certain logos and manifest.json and robots.txt. And our main area of concern is this source directory because we'll be coding inside this entire time. As you might see, there are certain files with the name app.css, app.js, index.js. So now this index is the top level of our component tree. It's going to sit at the top, and you might see that there's this get element by ID with the name root. So entire code that's being generated over here is going to be dumped up inside of a public folder inside this HTML index.html. And if you just scroll down over here, you might see this div with an ID root. So this is the place where entire compiled or transpiled code is going to put up. Now this index.html contains some meta and link tags, as you might be able to see them. All right, so before we do any other thing, let's just give it our first run. So to create or run our application or start a server, you just need to open up a terminal, and thankfully VS Code does have a inbuilt terminal. So just create a new terminal, and this is going to create a new terminal for you. So all right, before we move any further and launch our application, there are a few extensions that I'd like you to install because these extensions are a lot helpful because they make our development process easy. So to install this particular extension inside of your VS Code, and if you don't have them, then just head to your marketplace that is right over here. As you might see, that a kind of Rubik's cube shape in which one cube is actually detached from the whole cube. Just head over there. That's the marketplace. All right, so here we like to install certain extensions inside of our application, and that are namely auto close. So just search for auto close and head to this auto close segment. So now what this auto close does, the name is more than self-explanatory. It is going to make sure that every element that you create has a closing tag. It is really helpful, believe me. After this, we will be also installing this auto rename tag. So what this rename tag does is that, for example, if you decided that you need a h1 component, and for some reason at certain other point of time you decide no, this need not to be an h1, it needs to be an h3. So when you rename the first component, that is the h1 to h3, the closing element is, or the corresponding closing tag is also going to be renamed as h3. So these are the two helpful components that you can have inside of your arsenal if you wish. So all right, after the auto rename and auto close tag, I'd like you to have this extension inside of your VS Code, and that is your bracket pair colorizer. So just search for bracket pair colorizer, and you should just head to the second version of this. Okay, so just install this inside of a VS Code. It colorizes your bracket. Now after this, also install this npm. Just search for npm and install the verified versions of npm that are namely your npm that suppose your npm packages as well as your npm IntelliSense. So if you just head into npm, you might see it says it all. It says that this extension supports running npm scripts such as npm start and npm run build, defined in the package.json file, and validating the installed modules against the dependencies defined in the package.json. All right, so after this, I'd like you to also install this npm IntelliSense as a package inside of the application. So this helps us in autocomplete. And after this, there's this third package or the fourth package, I don't know which I'm on. This package that is ES7. So just search for ES7. React Redux and React Native snippets. So they create the boilerplate for our components that are really good. So I like you to install them as well. And then this last one, and that is Prettier. So Prettier is basically a code formatter that's going to help you to format your code. So you do not need to actually worry about indentation and all. So just install this as well. So these are all the packages that I like you to have inside of your application. Now why don't we actually give this our first run? So just open up your terminal and run the script command that says npm start. Now if you head over to your package.json file, you might see and scroll down. So here are a few script commands that says start, build, test, and eject. So start command is used to start a development server. You'll use the build command when you need to create a build directory, because as of now you might see that there is no such build directory over here. This is for development purposes. Alright, so now let's give it a first run. So just run the command inside of your inbuilt terminal npm start. So now let's start creating the components that we need inside of application. So head to your source directory, and inside this make a folder with the name components. Alright, so inside this folder we're going to have three folders, one with the name contact, and another folder inside of this components that is going to be known as contact form, and one more folder inside this that is going to be of name contact list. So inside the components, this third folder with the name contact list. Alright, so these are the three components that we'll be creating. So let's create a first component that is contact. So inside this, let's create a component that's going to be named as contact .jsx. Alright, so this is the first component that we'll be configuring. So now first step is that we'll be creating up this component. But before we do that, let's import this contact component inside of our application, that is our app.js. So let's import this contact form. So import contact, and this is coming from our contacts folder. So head to our components, and from the components inside of our contact, alright, so we are importing this particular component. Now rather than having this h1, we are going to have this component folder, component. So import, it's supposed to be import. Alright, so now let's import this. That's our contact. Alright, so now let's close this app and head to our contact.jsx. So now inside of a contact.js, this is going to be a functional component rather than being a class component. So let's create a function. And the function is going to have the name as contact. Alright, so give this a return as well. And let's inside this return, we are going to have a div. So let's create a div with an ID container. So let's create a div. And this is going to have the ID that's going to be equal to container. And inside this div, we are going to have another div with the ID box. So let's create another div with the ID that's going to be equal to box. Alright, so we are having these two divs. Now inside these two divs, we are going to import our other two components that are namely our contact form and contact list. So we'll be importing a contact form. As well as a contact list. So before we do that, let's export this component contact form as well. So let's export default contact. Alright, so now let's close this. Okay, so now let's head to our contact form and create it. So let's create a folder inside this, or a component that is going to be known as contact form.jsx. So this is going to be one component, and apart from this we are also going to have this contact list. So let's create another component with the name contact list .jsx. Alright, so now let's configure our contact form. So the first thing that we're going to do is that we'll be importing our contact form as well as a contact list. So let's import our contact form. This is coming from the same directory. Contact form, and inside the contact form our contact form. Alright, and apart from this we'll be also importing the second component, that is our contact list. Contact list and then contact list. Alright, now let's create these two components. So apart from this contact form, let's remove this, and we'll be having our actual contact form, and apart from this contact list we'll be having our actual contact list. Alright, now to format this, just press Ctrl Shift Alt plus F if you have installed Prettier. Alright, so now these two are in places. Now we'll be also passing data via props inside them, but before we do that we have to create data. So let's first import React from React. So we'll be importing React from React module, and apart from React we'll also be importing a hook which is known as useState hook. That's going to help us manage our state, because this is not a class component, therefore we just can't have state, but this hook is a escape hatch to having a state. Alright, so now let's create a const. This const is going to be named as contacts. So, and a setter function for this contacts. So a setter function for this contact is going to be called as set contacts. Alright, and now we'll have to provide it with initial state. So that's what we're going to do. So use state. So initially it is going to be an array of objects. So now inside this we'll be creating up 3 objects just as a default prop. So let's create these 3 objects. Alright, so this is our state. We are having this contacts, and this contacts is going to hold up this array that is going to have 3 objects inside it, as well as a setter function that is going to enable us to set these contacts. Now we need to pass this particular data via props, so that's what we are going to do. So we are going to supply this data to our list as well as a form. So I see that we are supposed to have a list at first and form at below. Alright. So now this list is in this list we're going to pass these contacts. So let's pass these contacts that we have here. This is going to be equal to contacts. Alright, so now we are all good. Now we need to pass this contact form a setter function that is going to enable us to add data to this particular contact. So let's pass it the setter function that is a set contacts as well as the list of contacts. So at first let's pass it contacts that is going to be equal to contacts as well as setter function. So it is going to be called as add contacts. And this is going to be equal to set contacts. Alright, so now we are all good. Now we are successfully passing these two data inside of a contact list as well as a contact form. Now what we are going to do is that we'll be creating up our form as well as our list. So the first on our list is this contact list. So let's create a contact list first, and later on we'll be moving inside of our contact form. So head to your contact list. So let's head to a contact list, and this is going to be a functional component. So now let's create a contact list. This is going to be a functional component as well. So at first let's import React from React. So head into your component contact list. So first step is to import React from React. All right, after this is going to be functional component. So function and form. So let's name it contact form. All right, so it is going to have some props that we are passing from our contact component. So let's create some props. Now this is going to have a return. So let's give it a return now. And inside this return, we're going to have a div. So let's first create a div. And inside this div, we're going to have an h2 tag that's going to contain the text contact list. So let's create an h2 tag, and it's going to contain contact list. All right. Now after this h2 tag, we're going to have an input that's going to have a placeholder and on change property. So let's create an input now. And this input is going to have a placeholder. So let's give this a placeholder as well. So this placeholder is going to be search. And after this placeholder, we are also going to have an on change property. So let's we'll be adding an on change property to it later when we will be adding a function to it. So let's now close this as it is now. And after this input, we're going to have a unordered list. So let's create a UL. So this is going to be responsible to display the contact list that we have of an ID that's going to be equal to list. Now let's close this UL, and all right, so this is our UL. Now after this, let's create a span. So this span is going to be responsible to display the total count. So we are having this particular span. This one is extra, and an ID that's going to be equal to total count. So let's give this an ID that is going to be equal to total count. All right. So now we are having this particular component. Now let's export this as well. So export default contact form. All right. So now what we're going to do is that we'll be destructuring that particular data that we're getting over here. So this is not going to be props. This is going to be equal to contacts. So this is what we are getting from our contacts form. This is the contact prop that we're getting over here. All right, so now let's create a const. So this is going to be const, and we are going to call this filter text. So let's call this filter text, and set a function for this that is going to set this filter text. So set that's going to be equal to use state. All right, so we are having this filter text as well as this setter function. Now let's create a const that is going to filter the data inside of our application. So a const that is going to be filtered data that's going to be equal to contacts. This is the data that we're getting from our contact.jsx. So we'll be filtering this particular data. Filter, and each time it is going to take up a contact or one particular item. So this is going to take a one particular item and return. So item and curly braces, then return objects dot key item dot sum so sum, this is going to take up a key, and after this our item key. So we need to convert this to string, return a string representation of an object, and after this we need to convert this to a lowercase, so to lowercase. So after this lowercase, if it includes our filtered text, So all right, this is what is going to be contained inside of a filter data. Now what this function does, as it says that it is going to filter and all the contact items, so what all contacts are inside of our state that are going to be passed to it, and it's going to filter from that and define whether the data is present in that particular array or not. So this is going to help us to search whether that particular contact is inside of a contact list or not. So now let's create another method that's going to help us to change our onChange. So add this with an onChange, not on volume change, on just change. Now it's going to take up an event, and anytime and every time there's a change in it, so we want to set the filter text this is going to be set to our e.target.value. Alright, so now we are setting our filtered text as well. Now after this, what we're going to do is that we'll be mapping this particular data inside of our filtered array, right inside this UL. So head inside this UL, and what we're going to do is that we'll be mapping that filtered data. So filtered data, it's going to be mapped over, and each time it's going to take up one particular item. So it's going to take up one particular item as well as a key. So after it has taken those items and key, what it's going to do is that it is going to create up an list tag. So let's create a list inside this. So it is going to create a list, and inside this list is going to have a key that's going to be equal to our key. So this is going to be equal to key. Now inside this we're going to have two spans. So let's create two spans, and this is going to, all right, so we are having three spans now. So span, all right. So we are having these two spans, and one is going to contain the name as well as the other is going to contain the phone number. So let's create the name. So item.name as well as item.phone number. It's supposed to be full name, so full underscore name as well as phone underscore number. All right, so now we have created a contact form as well, but we need to give it this a total number of contacts that we have. So to do that, what we're going to do is that we're going to pass it with filters at data.length. So total contacts is equals to filter data dot length. All right, so now we have created our contact list. Now head to our contact form so that we can create it. So now let's create this particular component form, or the contact form. So for that purpose, let's create a function. This is going to be named as contact form. All right, so now it's going to also take some amount of props that we are passing from our parent component, that's namely a contact.jsx. So it's going to take some amount of props as well as a return. And now inside this return, we're going to have a form. So let's create a form. Now inside this form, we're going to create a div. So let's create a div now. Alright, so now inside this div, we're going to have an input field as well as another div. So let's create an input field now
Now close this. Now make sure it's in order. Now let's copy this div, or perhaps make another div only. Create another div, and this div is again going to have an input field. So create an input. Alright, so head to your first div, and inside this head inside of your input, and this input is going to have a value as well as name, type and placeholder. So let's give them a name that's going to be equal to full name, full underscore name, and a type that's text, as well as a placeholder that says that it's full name. Full name. And after this, inside of this second input, we're going to have another type that's going to be equal to number. And after this type number, we are also going to have a name that's going to be equal to phone number. So this name is going to be equal to phone number. And a placeholder as well. So let's give this a placeholder. That's going to be equal to phone number. Alright, now this is also supposed to have a max length that we're going to put equal to 10. So let's give this a max length of 10 and a min length of 10. It's either supposed to be more than this, not less than this. Alright, so these are our two inputs inside of our application. Now after this, what we're going to do is that let's head out of this particular div. So let's make sure that it's formatted. Now let's head out of this div and let's create a div with an ID button. So this div, and it's going to have an ID that's equal to button. Alright, now inside this button we're going to have the text div with ID button, and inside this div we're going to create a button, and this button is going to have a text add. Alright, so this is the skeleton of our contact form. Now let's export this. Contact form. Alright, so now we are good with this. Now we need to create those particular methods inside this, as well as so that we can add this form and its data inside of our application. So now let's head up, and right after this function we are going to create a const with initial values. So const, and it's going to take some initial values, and this is going to be equal to full name, full underscore name, that's nothing but an empty string, as well as phone number, that's nothing but an empty string. Alright, so these are the initial values. So let's close this, and after this we are going to create a const. So we also need to import use the state. So we'll be using the useState hook inside of our contact form. So for that purpose, let's import React from React. Now we'll be using the useState. So const form, this is going to contain the form data, and set form. Alright, now this is going to be equal to react.useState dot use state. So these are the two ways in which you can use the state inside of a React component. Now let's pass in with the initial values. Alright, so this is a form. Now after this we're going to create a onChangeInput method as well as an onSubmitForm method. So let's create these two methods. So right after this we're going to create a method such as onChangeInput.
Alright, so this is the onChange input. This is going to take up an event, and once it does or take that event, it's going to set the form. So set form, now we need the previous form data that already exists to persist, as well as add new data. So we'll be using the spread operator. So spread operator is nothing but these three dots. Now after this pass in the form, this is going to make sure that all the form data has been passed to it, and after this we'll be adding the new data, that's our e.target.name. so respective data must be added to respective fields. The value that it is going to take is going to be equal to e.target.value. value. So this is what our onChange input does. Now after this we're going to create up a onSubmit form. So right after this onChange, let's create a const onSubmit. This too is going to take up one particular event, and after it does, it is going to make sure that browser doesn't reload. So e.prevent default. And after this, what we're going to do is that if there's going to be a validation, if form full name is nothing but null, for example, if the user doesn't enter anything and tries to hit the add button, so if the form.fullname triple equals nothing but an empty string, or form.phone number is also an empty string, or is this an empty string, then we want to alert our user saying this thing that please enter the data. Alright, so this is our onSubmit. Now after this we'll be making sure that we add data. Now let's add data inside of application. So if you might recall that we are passing this add contacts via props to our contact form. So why don't we actually destructure this here only? So contacts as well as add form, or what we have called over here as add contacts. So add contacts. Alright, so now after this has happened, we'll be making sure that we add this data. So add contacts, and we want the previous contacts to persist. So a spread operator and contacts as well as the new contact that has been filed by the user. So all the form data that exists. Alright, so this is all about our form data. Now let's pass this inside of our two inputs. So in the form, give it this an onSubmit, that's going to be equal to onSubmit, as well as we are going to pass our onChange properties. So give this input an onChange input, on input change, Alright, now we'll also supplying this with onChange. So onChange, this is also going to be equal to onChange input. So now let's take a look at application, and this is what it is. I know it looks pretty disgusting, but we'll be adding CSS to it so that it looks something more presentable. So to add CSS into our application, let's head back into our application, and I want you to move into your app.css file. So inside this app.css. Alright, so we already know there are quite a many ways in which we can style our application. We can either use CSS frameworks, or we can add random CSS to it. But we'll be using the CSS properties, or I must say that I'll be adding CSS to them in the CSS file so that we can define the styling of our application. Alright, so now let's add styles to our application. For that purpose, move into your app.css and get rid of everything except this align center. Now what we're going to do is that we'll be adding properties into our application that is going to help us to add styling into our application. For that purpose, the first step that we're going to do is that we'll be targeting our container, and since it is having an ID of div, let's give this container. So if you might recall, inside of our contact component, so contact.js, so it is having an ID of container. So let's add target this ID, so hashtag container. Alright, so inside this container, what you're going to do is that we'll be giving the display of flex and justify content center. So display of flex as well as justify content center. And align items center. Alright, so now after this display and align items, let's save this and take a look at our application. Alright, so now let's also give this a height of 100 VH and a width of 100%. After this height and width, give this flex direction that is going to be equal to column. As default, flex direction is row, so flex direction is equals to column. And after this width and flex direction, we'll also give it a background color and a color. So give this a color as well. Now the color that we're going to provide to it is going to be equal to hashtag 10012443. Alright, so now after this color, give this a background color as well. Now this background color is going to be hashtag D1A. So hashtag D1A and 795. Alright, so this is the background color. Now let's save this and take a look at our app. So yeah, the entire segment has been centered as well as the color has been applied to it. Now let's head back into our application. Now let's target the box ID. So if you might recall, inside of our contact, we are having this box, div with ID box. So this is going to be for this particular box segment. So if I just use my extension. So alright, now let's head back and now let's target the property or target the ID box. Now inside this box, we are going to have a background color. So give this a background color that's going to be equal to hashtag FD D2BF. Alright, so 2BF, this is the background color. After this, give this a padding as well. So padding, that's going to be 15 pixels. And after this padding, give this a width of 400 pixels. Now let's save and take a look at our app. So alright, now the CSS is being applied to it. Now let's close this extension. Alright, so now let's head back into our app, and now what we're going to do is that we'll be also giving this a border radius of 5 pixels. So if at the moment I see that there is no border radius, so now let's give this a border radius. Now this border radius is going to be equal to 5 pixels. And after this, give this a box shadow as well. So a box shadow. Now this is going to be equal to 0, 0, 20 pixels. So 0 pixels, 0 pixels, and again 20 pixels, and a color of hashtag 012443. And after this we'll be also giving it a color, so hashtag 10012443. Alright, so this is the box color. Now come right behind this, and what we're going to do is that we'll be targeting the input fields, because at the moment when we saw that the input fields were quite raw. So let's cook them. We'll give them a width of 100%, and after this width give them a box sizing as well. So box sizing, and this is going to be equal to border box. Alright, so after giving them a width and box sizing, let's give them a WebKit box sizing of border box as well. So WebKit box sizing border box, and after this a mouse box sizing of border box, and a border radius of 2 pixels. 2 pixels. And after this border radius, let's give the margin of 3 pixels. So margin of 3 pixels and 0. And after this, an outline of none and a font size of 14 pixels. Outline none and font size of 14 pixels. Font size 14 pixels. So this goes for our input now. Now let's target a button. So let's target a class of button. So inside this button we are going to give it a display of flex. So give this button a display of flex, as well as justify content flex end. Justify content flex end. Alright. Now after this we'll be targeting a button. So button ID as well as button. So button ID as well as buttons. Alright, so these buttons are going to have a background color transparent. So background is going to be transparent. So here is transparent. After this, a color of hashtag triple F. Hashtag triple F, then that again is white. And after it, a border of none. A border of none. And after this, display of block. Display block, and a color that's basically the background color, and this is going to be equal to hashtag 012. Okay, this is the color. Now after this, what we're going to do is that we'll make sure that it has a width of 75 pixels. So width of 75 pixels, and after this width we'll also give this a padding. So give this a padding as well, 6 pixels and 20 pixels. And after this, a margin, and this margin is going to be equal to 10 pixels and 0 and 0 and 0, and a border radius of 3 pixels. So border radius 3 pixels. And after this we'll be targeting our unordered list as well as our list items. So UL and LI. So list style type should be none. We do not want those black dots over there. So list style type should be equals to none. Okay. So now after this, the h2 tags that we have inside of our application. So these are going to have a text align of left. So text align is left. Now after this h2, let's target our list of. So if you might recall, inside of a contact list, we are having this UL as ID list. So this is what we're targeting now. So list hashtag list. Now inside this list we're going to have a width of about 100%, and after this width 100%, give this a padding as well. So this padding is going to be equal to 0 and 10 pixels. 0 and 10 pixels. All right. Now after this padding, give them a box sizing of border box and a transition of all linear 300 milliseconds. So box sizing of border box as well as transition, that is going to be equal to all linear 300 milliseconds. Alright, so these are our list. Now target the list ID as well as the list elements. Inside them, we're going to give them a width that's 100% and a display. This is going to be equal to flex again, and after this display a margin of, so give them a margin of 5 pixels and 0. After this justify content, so justify content space between, and after this a font weight, so font weight, this is going to be equal to 500. Alright, so this is the list li. Now probably the last ID of our application that is going to be displayed as the total count, so hashtag total count. Alright, so this is going to have a font weight of 500 and a margin of 10 pixels and 0, and after this margin a text align of right and padding of 0 and 10 pixels, and after this a display of block, so display should be block. Alright, so here is our entire CSS of our application. Now let's launch this application and see how it looks.